All right, so back on story maps. Here is the place that we were hanging out earlier, and we were at the gallery for a while. And the gallery, again, has sort of the story maps greatest hits, the gallery of, of the story maps that are out there. And these rotate from time to time. But in this case, for the next few minutes, I'm going to go to the apps area. And if you've got a device, such as a tablet or a laptop, and you've got internet connectivity, you can go ahead and do the same thing I'm doing. If not, no worries, you don't have to. Let's go to apps. And this is where you start creating a story map. Remember, there's 3 different ways of creating a story map. One way, sorry, and the simplest way is actually to use the builder mode that we're going to go through here in a moment. The builder mode has you start with nothing at all. Basically, you've got images and videos somewhere, and you want to compile them into a story map. Well, that is where we are right now with these app templates. And so if you didn't know what kind of story, you could say, hey, create story. And then you could think, oh, well, what do I want to do here? And if I kind of scroll over these things, I can say, oh, a map tour, guide people through a sequence of places. That's actually what I want to do here with you all in these next few moments. But you can do a similar kind of roll over these other app types and say, oh, okay, that's what I want to do, and therefore I will pick it. So if I'm thinking, okay, map tour is where I want to start, I'm going to click on map tour. And then since you're going to build something, it's going to pop you into, okay, if you're going to build something, that means you're going to have to park something online. And in order to place them things or park some things or publish some things online, you need to actually log into ArcGIS Online to do that. Now, when we were looking at the gallery earlier, the gallery, you don't have to log in, right? All those story maps are open, shared with the public. So no login, no sign in required. But here, if you're going to create your own content, does that make sense that you're going to actually have to log in or sign in?
Yes, that does.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to sign in with my own credentials here in ArcGIS Online, and you at the Lincoln Institute can use your own credentials. Now, let's say you don't have an account there. Well, what do you do? Well, remember I mentioned the developer account earlier, or the developer site. In the developer site, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, it's, oh, I want to start. I want to get started with the developer. Here we go. The developer site. Oh gosh, where did we put the sign in? we kind of moved it around. It used to be right at the bottom of the page, but on here there's a way to create your a free account, and so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, great. So I'm already logged in, so it's going to say, hey, Joseph, we see that you're logged in here, blah, blah, blah. But if I wasn't logged in, oh, that's why. Yeah, I was already logged in, so I didn't see that. But in the developer site, so go to developers.arcgis.com. You won't be signed in probably when you go there, so there'll be a place for you to okay, don't have an account, sign up for a free developer account. Now, you can't geocode every single water well in Texas with a developer account. You get a decent but a limited number of credits in ArcGIS Online that you can use as a sandbox. So I always encourage people, even if you've got your organizational subscription through Lincoln, still get a developer account because that's kind of your sandbox. I tell students the same thing. Hey, you're using Penn State or you're using University of Illinois' account right now, but guess what? Someday you'll graduate. And so you'll want a developer account so that you can have a sandbox of making maps and making story maps and sharing those and so on. So I'd still go here at some point to get a free account there. But I think it's actually better to use your Lincoln account because then you've got more capacity, sharing with your own organization, and so on and so forth. And that's where my colleagues, Paul and Carl, can guide you further on. You know, what exactly do you have now? What do you need to be successful going forward in terms of Esri technology and all that sort of stuff, okay? So logging in, And then we're going to create a story map. As you can see in my slide here, trees of Australia. Good day, mate. She'll be right. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a story map of that particular theme. I'm going to get rid of a couple of these tabs, if you don't mind. And the first thing it's going to ask you is, okay, I see that you want to create a map tour. Where are your images or videos? Now, as you can see on this opening slide, they're either already online or maybe they're not online. I need to put them there so I can upload them into ArcGIS Online. So you do have the option of uploading images, for example, into the same platform that you're using for your mapping. I tend to not do that. I tend to use ArcGIS Online for my mapping, and I tend to use one of these other sources for my images, my photographs. But you are totally flexible in doing whatever you think is the best workflow for your own organization. Now, these left side, the disadvantages of using, existing image libraries is, as I mentioned about 10 minutes ago, they do change. Flickr is, these things, they'll be bought by another company, and, they'll change their platform and they'll change their uses and so on. So that all being said, there are pros and cons with both sides here. The main point, though, is that they cannot be local, right? You cannot point in your story map to some photo or video on your local drive, right? These are cloud-based tools. And so your data has to be on the cloud. Doesn't have to be necessarily shared with the whole planet if you're not going to share your story map with the whole planet, but it needs to be accessible by the story map's tool set. And so mine, in this case, are on Flickr, and I'm going to go ahead to say, Joseph_Kursky, which is what I have in this exercise, and then I'm going to do a lookup. Now, this touches on what I was indicating earlier. Be organized about your content. Be organized. So in this case, in my Flickr album, these are all publicly shared, I've got a folder called Trees of Australia, which is what I'm going to make my story map on. So I'm not pointing to a folder that has a bazillion images in it, right? I'm pointing to something that's fairly doable and manageable. So again, be organized, and it'll make life a lot easier for you when you're making your story maps. So I'm going to select Trees of Australia. It tells me, which is one of the reasons why I like using Flickr, that I've got 5 images in there. So I'm going to go ahead and import. And the first thing it does is it Geo Tags my images. Now, it knows my images are there because I had taken them actually with my phone, okay? So I had the location-based services on. Now, if you've got a device that either your location-based services were off or you didn't have a GPS chip, it's just a regular old camera that's not connected or connectable, no worries. You can drag, either A, drag the photographs to their correct location, or B, use a different method, like a spreadsheet where you've got a latitude and longitude for each one of these points. So there are other ways to get your content into the correct geographic space. In my case, though, it was easy because I had the location-based services on, and I took the photograph, and if they're not exactly where I want them, I can move them. Why wouldn't they be exactly where I want them? Well, maybe I was in downtown Melbourne, where a lot of tall buildings, or you're in downtown Phoenix with a lot of tall buildings, or you're in a canyon somewhere. You've got some big canyons there in Arizona. Let's say you're in one of those canyons, and you've got solid structure. So you've got lack of GPS triangulation, lack of cell phone towers, lack of Wi-Fi hotspots that you're triangulating off of to accurately fix your location. No worries, you can move it. You can move your point if it's not exactly where you want it to be. But in my case, they are, and so I'm going to go ahead and say import here. Now I've got, if I hadn't been talking so much, you can see that it really only took about 30 seconds to create the basics of my story map. Another nice thing about Flickr is that it took the title of my photograph, and that became the title of my particular stop or frame in my map tour. So in this case, palm tree in Perth. Hey, that's the same thing as my caption. This palm tree was in Kings Park. You see where I'm going with this, right, folks? So I've got the ability to interact with it right here. I can go to my next one, and I can look at the eucalyptus tree in Canberra at the university there, and so on and so forth. I love this tree right here. You folks at Lincoln might like this. This is the funkiest, coolest. They got some really interesting trees there. So here's another thing. I've got this in a certain order. If I click on this left side here, organize tour points and add a cover page. Well, okay, I want that cool tree in Sydney to be the first frame. So all I'm doing is I'm going to drag it there. As you can see that this is actually fairly interactive. You don't really need me, folks. You don't need me to be talking with you much more about story maps, because after this webinar, you'll say, I totally get that, Joseph. I may not know everything there is to know about story maps, but I can get started with it. And also it's connected to the other things that I'm doing in GIS. So it's, again, not just like this little sidebar thing, but it's actually connected to my data that I'm using, and I can create a story map from. So absolutely. So another thing, let's just go to settings here. As you might expect, you're going to be able to change the logo here from Esri to the Lincoln logo. You're going to be able to change the data. You can add a new photo, et cetera, et cetera. Zoom level. What do you want the map extent to be? You want that base map to be changed? Well, no worries. We can do that too. We can go to Openstreetmap for the base. And now, as we zoom in, we're going to see the Openstreetmap base, and I'm going to be able to see where was I there in Perth, right? And now I've got the Openstreetmap base, so I can see indeed I was up in that park I was telling you about, overlooking the water. When I took that picture of that tree. If it's not exactly right there, actually this right over here, let's just go there. The point number 2 now is the palm. Yeah, so you can see there that this is really actually pretty cool. The tree that's, you can see the Openstreetmap actually has trees digitized. And so one of those trees is actually this palm. I was standing sort of by this sculpture here. Anyway, the point is that you can create these story maps and then modify them, okay? Now this builder mode gives you some modification if you want to dig deeper and really customize this. Again, that's where method 3 comes in, where you're totally customizing the experience. But even in the builder mode, you've got some flexibility and some ways of changing this. So one last thing to mention here, I want to add a new tour point. Let's say I've made my map tour, and then, oops, I've gone out in the field and I've collected some additional data, and I want to add that in here as a video or some piece of text or something like that, so I can add it here into my map tour right here. Okay, so all good. Now, when I create this, it's going to be named based on the title here. So I'm going to call it Lincoln Webinar, okay? And that way I know that this is the story map that I created when I was working with you all, or all y'all, as they say in Texas, right? So, okay, I'm going to call it that. That's great. Now I'm going to hit this save button, and it's going to put me in that zone that I mentioned earlier on the slide that's called My Stories. It's the story of a lovely web map. Sorry, folks, I just couldn't resist. I just wanted to make sure you folks were still with me. All right, so I'm going to use My Stories. I know this is a lot of words. Okay, My Stories. So if I go to My Stories now, as you would expect, the story map that I just created is at the top, right? So see, I've got some different things on down the I've got 169 stories in this particular account. So I'm going to go to that first one, which is the one I just created with all of you. And so you can see, okay, I can create a thumbnail. I can create some additional metadata in here, which is going to be very important if you share these with others. And here's the sharing. So right now, nobody else can see this except you and I being on the webinar. But if I wanted to make it public, I could do that. And this right in the middle here, if I want to share it with my organization, I can do that too. If I share it with my organization, I also have the option of sharing it with a group inside my organization. So let's say your organization, Lincoln Institute, and you've got some groups inside there, inside ArcGIS Online at some point. And maybe that group is 5 people working on a particular project. You can just share it with those 5 people. Ooh, so you've got a lot of flexibility in there between no sharing and general public. Even if you share it with the general public, though, nobody's going to be able to find this unless you tweet about it, blog about it, write about it. The reason why I say that is because if you have noticed, for example, this URL at the top of this particular map that I just made, this story map, it's got this big, long, gnarly alphanumeric string of characters. That's the map ID. So that is a particular unique ID to that map. And the reason why I mention it now is because nobody is going to be able to really stumble across your map just because it's online. So you really need to promote it and highlight it in some way. That's actually kind of a good thing, because that way you can actually share it with the public and then send it the URL to someone to look at, and you're sort of safeguarded with really the likelihood of someone stumbling across this that you don't want to see it right now because maybe it's not fully baked, or it's in progress. They're not going to be able to find it. So that's actually good. All right.
Joseph, is it possible to change the URL for you to add like the name of your story map at the end of that?
You can make our version of a Bitly link, or you can use Bitly, of course, as well. So ArcGIS, for example, if I go to my stories, so let's say I want to create a story map, and I want to have, I don't want to point people to this big old long gnarly URL, I think is what you're getting at. Yeah, so A, Bitly to it, or B, another way to do it is you can go into, okay, let's go into Arc. This is good that you're asking. So this is all connected, right? So if I go into ArcGIS Online and I sign in with the same sign-in credentials that I used to make the story map, what I just created actually goes into your ArcGIS Online account. So if I go to my content and I take a look at this, so notice the first two things I've got that I just created. You might say, well, wait a minute, Joseph, I think we just made one thing. Well, remember, story maps are apps, and they point to a web map. So even though in the builder mode, it looked like we were just creating one thing, it actually created two things. One is the map behind the story map, which is this thing right here. It's going to have my tour points on it. You might be tempted to say, hey, you know what? I don't need the map because all I need is the story map. Well, no, you need both of those things. Even if you don't do anything with the map has to be behind the scenes. Here's my Openstreetmap, right? So I've got this sitting inside ArcGIS Online. Yeah, so that still has to be there. That was a bit of another technical detail, but I wanted to show you that so that you'd see that. But back on your point, though, so you've got a map and you've got a story map, and they're both inside that same account that you used to create this. And let's go back to my content. So see here, I've got shared with no one, so I've got a little padlock on there. And let's say I go into my web map, I can create a when I save and share this. Well, let's just go into this right here, back on this one. If I wanted to share my map or my story map, I can do that. So if I wanted to share the map itself, if I go into this, I've got a link on the right side there, and this is our own, this is teeny tiny text. I don't know how to make this bigger. It's our own version of Bitly. So we've got a registered Bitly shortcut called arcg.is, arcg-is, if you know what I mean. And it's got a little string after, it's like 6 characters. So that's a thing that you could actually copy. And if I opened it up into a different tab, it's just arcg.is / and then those 6 characters. Yeah. If I open that up, it's going to point to the whole long gnarly thing. So you can use that one to share it with people, or you can, again, create your own Bitly link with pointing to this. So either way. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. All right, let's go back into my stories. And let me move this aside. And here we are in my story. So this is where we were a moment ago. Just a couple more things. I showed you inside ArcGIS Online that we've got a map and a story map. And this indicates it right here. So here's my map. Why would I ever care about the map? Well, let's say, in this case, if it's trees of Australia, I might want to have content added to the map, like ecoregions, so I can see what trees correspond to which ecoregions. Or let's say it's some project that you all have going on at Lincoln Institute. You want to show the built environment of a certain city, the land use patterns. Maybe your base map has land use of that city, or zoning, or urban greenways, or any of the other good things that you folks are involved with. See what I mean? So you can actually edit the map here and add content to it. And since this is wonderful. Since your story map points to your map, when you update your map, your story map will automatically update. Now you may have to do a refresh on your browser, but it automatically will update because it's pointing to the map. Very cool. So you can preview it from here. And the main thing, though, to point out here is that this is kind of like what I was saying before when you're editing web pages. It tells you, hey, your images all work. Your map works. There's no broken maps, layers, images, etc. Videos, they all work. So you can go here to sort of manage your content there. All right, so that's the My Stories zone. So you can see there that in just a few moments, we had created a story map that tells a story about, okay, distribution of different types of vegetation, in this case trees, on a certain continent, in this case Australia. So you could use that same idea to build a map tour of your own area of interest. I already showed you one example earlier today of the Lakota language one. That's a map tour. And the only difference there is that instead of a regular caption, I have an audio file of that landform in English and in Lakota. That's the only difference there. Yep. So also I have one of the images where I'm using a video instead. And you may wonder, oh, Joseph, you know, yeah, we want to see how to do that. Well, you know, again, much of this is actually pretty easy. So I'm clicking on my photo. Now if I want a video, hey, I just click on video link. And now what I want to do here, just a small techie note, is I actually want to point to the embed code. Like let's say if it's in YouTube, I don't want the whole YouTube frame. You know what I mean? With all those related videos on the side, which oftentimes are not related at all, right? You want to, if you've got a video on, I'll just say urban greenways again. You only want the video of urban greenways in there. You don't want the related you know, YouTube videos or Vimeo or whatever it is. So these are very good to take the embed code in here. Okay, very good. All right, folks. The Young Scholars. That's another map tour. It's just in our mode of showing you examples. So here we've got an Esri Young Scholars program, and so as you can see here, I just used a map tour. So instead of the standard caption, I have a link to the person's PDF of their project, if that makes sense. So I just have a link there instead of a standard caption. So I did that for each one of these folks so people can say, wow, look at the good work these people are doing from all over the world. Very cool. Okay? All good. So that's just a map tour. Took me a little longer because I had to basically put these PDFs out on, in my case, box.com. But that is publicly accessible. So this is this person's poster. Very cool. All right, folks, we are rolling along here. We've got about 10 more minutes, correct, in our webinar. So let's I'm going to scroll through this next part. This next part is I've got a web map, and I want to make a story map from it. I'm going to let you do this on your own, just in the interest of time. But what I have you start with is you start with a median age and median income. It's San Diego, California. I have you build a swipe map, swipe story map from that. So it's on one side is going to be median age, one other side is going to be median income. So I have you do that inside that next activity. Also kind of related, I have a slide in here, an activity where you build a map note. I know it sounds really basic, but it's a nice way of communicating. And that's our whole theme here this morning is that or this afternoon, wherever you happen to be, we are all about communicating with maps. So map notes are easy to do, and I've got a slide in here on how to do that. Now let me spend just a few minutes here creating a story map journal so you'll see what I mean here. So I'm going to create a story maps journal in much the same way. Story map journal is a little more power, takes a little more time, but I think you might find the map journals and the cascade maps also quite useful. So in this case, I'm going to go to storymaps.arcgis.com again. And it's going to sound familiar, but we're going to go to apps again, and I'm going to create story. And hopefully this is familiar to you because we just did this about 5 minutes ago. This time I want to make a map journal. So again, I'm just going to give you the basics to start with, and you're going to be able to say to yourselves, I totally get that, Joseph. I could totally do that by myself, or maybe with a couple of colleagues here at Lincoln. So I want a side panel. I'm going to start, and okay, what do we want to call it? I'm going to call it my Feeding the Planet. So it's going to be a sustainable agriculture theme for Lincoln Institute. Okay, all good. So I've got a main stage and a side panel with this. And I'm going to go back to my slides so you can see where I'm going. So I'm going to Story Maps. I clicked Apps, Build, Side Panel, Feeding the Planet. So I'm already on step 5. Configure content. Click Image, Flickr, Map Journal. So I've got photos in Flickr once again. And it is a map journal. Yep. And, oh, I've already got it started. Yeah, here we go. Map journal. And